The courtroom felt like a cathedral of judgment, its mahogany walls bearing witness to countless battles between truth and deception. Margaret Chen sat rigid in the defendant's chair, her usually immaculate suit now wrinkled from sleepless nights, her hands trembling as reporters' cameras clicked like hungry vultures. The woman who had built Horizon Technologies from a garage startup into a Fortune 500 company now faced 20 years in federal prison for embezzlement charges that could destroy everything she'd worked for. Her legal team looked defeated, their briefcases heavy with evidence that seemed to point nowhere but guilty. In the gallery behind her, former employees whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disappointment, others nodding as if they'd always suspected this day would come. But in the very back row, almost hidden in the shadows, sat a man whose presence no one noticed, to a man they all knew but never really saw. Marcus Williams had been pushing a mop through Horizon's gleaming corridors for 12 years. Arriving before dawn and leaving long after the executives had gone home to their suburban mansions. At 62, his shoulders carried the weight of countless overtime shifts, his calloused hands bore the marks of every spill cleaned and every surface polished. To most people at Horizon, he was invisibly just the janitor who emptied their trash and restocked their coffee stations. They'd nod politely when they passed him in the hallways, if they acknowledged him at all, never bothering to learn that he'd put 3 children through college on his custodial salary, or that he volunteered at the homeless shelter every weekend, or that he had a master's degree in accounting that economic circumstances had never allowed him to use. The prosecution's case seemed airtight. District Attorney Rebecca Morrison laid out a damning narrative of corporate greed, presenting bank records that showed $2.3 million in suspicious transfers from company accounts to what appeared to be Margaret's personal investments. Financial experts testified about sophisticated money laundering schemes. Former CFO David Brennan, granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, painted Margaret as a manipulative leader who pressured him into falsifying records while she siphoned funds into offshore accounts. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Morrison declared during her opening statement, her voice sharp as a blade, "this is a classic case of corporate corruption. Margaret Chen betrayed the trust of her employees, her shareholders, and her community. She stole from the very people who built her company's success." Margaret's defense attorney, James Patterson, seemed to be fighting an uphill battle. His arguments felt weak, circumstantial. "My client is innocent," he insisted, but even his voice lacked conviction. The evidence was overwhelming, the narrative compelling. Margaret Chen looked guilty. And in America's current climate of corporate skepticism, that was often enough. As the trial progressed, witness after witness took the stand. Accounting supervisors testified about irregular financial reports. Security guards spoke about late-night meetings in Margaret's office. The media painted her as another greedy executive who'd forgotten her humble beginnings, another symbol of everything wrong with American capitalism. But Marcus Williams saw something different. During his years at Horizon, he'd observed Margaret from a unique vantage point. He'd seen her working 18-hour days, not for personal gain, but to save jobs during the 2020 recession. He'd witnessed her personal checks covering employee medical bills when insurance fell short. He'd watched her sleep on her office couch rather than go home, determined to find solutions that would protect her workforce. He'd seen the real Margaret Chen, not the corporate figurehead, but the human being who remembered every janitor's name and asked about their families. More importantly, Marcus had seen things others hadn't. His late-night cleaning rounds had given him access to conversations, documents, and activities that occurred after normal business hours. He'd watched David Brennan, the star prosecution witness, working alone in the finance department at 2 a.m., frantically moving money between accounts while Margaret was out of town. He'd seen Brennan shredding documents and overheard phone calls about covering tracks and setting up the perfect fall guy. On the trial's 7th day, just as Patterson was about to rest his case with little hope of acquittal, Marcus Williams stood up in the gallery. His movement was so unexpected, so out of place, that the entire courtroom turned to look at this elderly black man in his clean but modest suit. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "I have information that's relevant to this case." The judge, Honorable Patricia Hawkins, looked skeptical. "Sir, this is highly irregular." "Are you represented by counsel?" "No, ma'am. But I work at Horizon Technologies for 12 years. I clean the offices, including Mr. Brennan's. And I saw things that nobody else saw." Morrison objected immediately. "Your Honor, this man isn't on any witness list. This is clearly a desperate attempt to—" "I'll allow it," Judge Hawkins interrupted. "This is a federal case involving serious charges. If this gentleman has relevant information, the jury deserves to hear it." As Marcus walked to the witness stand, whispers rippled through the courtroom. Margaret Chen looked up for the first time in days, tears streaming down her face as she recognized the man who'd smiled at her every morning for over a decade. Under oath, Marcus began to tell his story. He spoke about the night shifts when David Brennan thought no one was watching. He described finding deleted emails in Brennan's trash, emails that detailed the embezzlement scheme and specifically discussed framing Margaret for the theft. He produced copies of documents he'd collected, not from any desire to spy, but from his habit of thoroughly cleaning every office and occasionally finding important papers that needed to be returned to their proper files. Mr. Brennan had been stealing from the company for 3 years, Marcus testified, his voice growing stronger with each word. He used Miss Chen's access codes, which he'd obtained by watching her type them in. He created false reports to cover his tracks, and when the auditors started getting close, he decided to make it look like Miss Chen was responsible. The courtroom erupted. Morrison tried desperately to discredit Marcus, suggesting he was lying to protect his employer. But Marcus had receipts, literally time-stamped security footage that he'd requested from his friend in building security, showing Brennan in the office alone during the times when the suspicious transfers occurred. Financial documents with Brennan's handwriting, not Margaret's. Phone records showing calls between Brennan and known money launderers. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Patterson asked during redirect examination. Marcus looked directly at Margaret, then at the jury. "Because I'm just the janitor." "Who's going to believe the janitor over the CFO?" "But I couldn't sit here and watch an innocent woman go to prison for something she didn't do." "Miss Chen is a good person. She treats people with dignity, regardless of their position. She deserves better than this." The trial took a dramatic turn. Faced with Marcus's evidence, David Brennan's immunity deal crumbled. Within hours, he confessed to the embezzlement scheme, admitting that he'd manipulated records to frame Margaret while he stole millions for his gambling addiction and failed investments. But the story's true power wasn't in the legal victory, it was in what happened next. As Margaret walked out of the courthouse a free woman, she found Marcus waiting by the steps. She threw her arms around him, sobbing with relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." Marcus smiled, the same gentle smile he'd given her every morning for 12 years. "We're all just people trying to do right by each other, Miss Chen. Nobody should have to face injustice alone." The media coverage that followed focused on the dramatic courtroom reversal. But Margaret Chen knew the real story. She established the Marcus Williams Scholarship Fund, providing full college tuition for the children of service workers. She restructured Horizon's corporate hierarchy to include employee representatives at every level of decision-making. Most importantly, she made sure that every person in her company, from the boardroom to the janitor's closet, was treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. Marcus returned to his job at Horizon, though now his title read Facilities Director and his salary reflected his true value to the organization. But he still arrived before dawn and stayed late, still smiled at everyone he met, still volunteered at the homeless shelter on weekends. Because for Marcus Williams, it had never been about recognition or reward, it had always been about doing what was right. The courtroom may have been a cathedral of judgment, but Marcus Williams proved that sometimes the most powerful testimony comes not from expert witnesses or legal scholars, but from ordinary people who choose to speak truth in the face of overwhelming odds. In a world that often overlooks its heroes, he reminded everyone that dignity isn't determined by job title, and that justice sometimes wears a janitor's uniform.